If this moment feels like it just happened to stumble into your day, I want you to pause for a second, because nothing about this is random. I know life has a way of making us feel like things just happen, like we scroll and click and land wherever the algorithm takes us, but God does not move by chance. He moves with intention. He moves with precision. He moves with purpose. And if this message found you today, it's not because you were bored or curious or killing time. It's because God knows exactly where you are, exactly what you've been thinking about, and exactly what you've been asking Him. Sometimes out loud and sometimes in the quiet places you don't let anybody see. There are moments when God interrupts our routine because He needs to remind us that He's still involved. You've been doing your best to hold it together, showing up, smiling when you're tired, saying I'm fine when you're anything but that. And in the middle of all of that, God steps in and says, I see you. Not just the version of you that performs, but the version of you that is overwhelmed, uncertain, and quietly hoping something shifts soon. This is one of those moments. This is not coincidence. This is confirmation. You didn't just wake up today and randomly land here. God has been tracking your steps. He has been listening to prayers you stopped repeating because you didn't want to be disappointed again. He has been paying attention to the questions you asked Him once and then tucked away because the answer didn't come when you expected it to. Timing matters to God. He could have sent this message yesterday. He could have sent it last week. But He chose now, because now is when your heart is open enough to receive it, even if your faith feels a little tired. Sometimes we think God speaks only when everything is quiet and holy and perfectly aligned, but often He speaks in the middle of ordinary days, in between responsibilities, while you're trying to figure out what's next. He speaks when you're scrolling because your mind won't rest. He speaks when you feel stuck because that's when you're most aware of your need for Him. And that awareness is not weakness, it's invitation. There's a reason this message found you in this season. You've been standing at a crossroads whether you realize it or not. You've been asking yourself questions like, am I behind? Did I miss something? Is this all there is? And God is answering those questions, not with panic, not with pressure, but with reassurance. He's reminding you that He doesn't rush and He doesn't forget. He doesn't lose track of His children, and He doesn't mismanage their timelines. You may feel like you're late, but God is never late. You may feel like things are taking too long, but delay is not denial. Sometimes God slows things down because He's protecting you from stepping into something before you're ready to sustain it. Sometimes He withholds clarity because He's teaching you to trust His character instead of relying on your understanding. And sometimes He sends a message like this just to let you know you're still on my mind. What if today isn't about fixing everything, but about realigning your perspective? What if this moment is God gently pulling your attention back to Him, not to shame you, but to steady you? You've been carrying so much on your own, trying to make sense of everything, trying to plan 5 steps ahead because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. But God is saying you don't have to figure it all out today. You just have to remember who's guiding you. This is how God works. He doesn't always shout. Sometimes He whispers. Sometimes He doesn't give you the whole map. He just lights up the next step. And the fact that you're here right now means that this is one of those illuminated moments. It's a reminder that God is closer than you think, more involved than you realize, and far more intentional than your circumstances suggest. You might have thought no one noticed how hard this season has been for you. You might have assumed that because things haven't changed yet, God must be silent. But silence is not absence. Stillness is not neglect. God has been working in ways you can't see yet, aligning things behind the scenes, preparing hearts, opening doors that won't make sense until you walk through them. And this moment right here is part of that process. Let this sink in. God chose this moment to reach you. Not because you earned it, not because you figured something out, but because He loves you enough to meet you where you are. That alone should shift how you see today. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. You are not off schedule. You are right where God can speak to you, shape you, and lead you forward. So take a breath. Let go of the pressure to have everything answered right now. Receive this as a reminder that your life is being guided with intention, even when it feels uncertain. And trust that if God was intentional enough to bring this message to you today, He is intentional enough to carry you into everything He has promised. I need you to hear this clearly, because the enemy loves to twist the story when life gets hard. What you've been walking through is not punishment. It's preparation. I know it hasn't felt that way. I know there were nights you questioned yourself, moments you wondered what you did wrong, seasons where you replayed decisions trying to figure out where things went off track. But God is not responding to you with anger. He is not correcting you through pain. He is preparing you through process. We tend to think that if something is difficult, it must mean we missed God. But what if the resistance you felt is not evidence of failure, but proof of formation? What if the weight you've been carrying is not meant to crush you, but to strengthen muscles you didn't even know you'd need? God has a way of developing us in places that don't look impressive, don't feel productive, and don't get applause. And yet, those are the places that shape us the most. You didn't imagine the stretching. You didn't exaggerate the struggle. That season really did ask more of you than the one before it. But it wasn't because God was trying to break you down. It's because He was building you up for something that will require depth, endurance, and discernment. If God were punishing you, He would leave you where you are. But preparation means He's taking you somewhere. There are things God needed to work out of you before He could release what He's been working toward. No, because you were unworthy, but because you were valuable. You don't reinforce something that's disposable. You don't refine what you plan to discard. You prepare what you plan to use, and you are being used, even in this season that feels like waiting, pruning, and pressure. Some of what you've endured has been teaching you how to stand without immediate validation. You've had to obey without applause, trust without proof, and keep moving without clarity. That's not punishment. That's maturity. God has been strengthening your inner life so that when doors open, you don't collapse under the weight of new responsibility. He's been training your character so your calling doesn't outrun your capacity. You may have wondered why it had to be this hard, why it couldn't have come easier, why other people seemed to move forward while you felt stuck managing obstacles. But ease doesn't always produce strength. Comfort doesn't always create wisdom. God loves you too much to give you something that would outgrow you before you were ready to sustain it. So He allowed the process to stretch you, slow you, and shape you. Think about how much you've learned in this season about boundaries, about discernment, about trusting God instead of forcing outcomes. You don't tolerate what you used to tolerate. You don't chase what you used to chase. You don't panic the way you once did. That didn't happen by accident. That came from walking through moments that demanded growth. That came from sure that revealed where God needed to strengthen you. Even the disappointments had purpose. They taught you not to put your identity in outcomes. They taught you that closed doors are not personal attacks, but divine protection. They taught you how to grieve without quitting, how to pause without losing faith, how to keep your heart open even when things didn't go your way. That's not punishment. That's preparation with intention. And let me say this, because someone needs it. Just because you were corrected doesn't mean you were condemned. Just because God redirected you doesn't mean He rejected you. Sometimes love looks like interruption. Sometimes grace looks like delay. Sometimes favor looks like God saying not yet because He sees what you can't. And in hindsight, you'll thank Him for the moments that didn't work out the way you planned. God has been sharpening your discernment so you don't confuse access with alignment. He's been teaching you to wait for His voice instead of rushing to fill the silence. He's been building resilience in you so that when pressure comes later, it doesn't surprise you or steal your peace. All of this has been intentional. All of this has been strategic. None of it has been wasted. You may still feel tired. Preparation can be exhausting. Growth can feel lonely. But exhaustion doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it means you're doing something meaningful. And God sees your faithfulness in the unseen moments. He sees you choosing to trust Him when it would be easier to give up. He sees you staying soft in a season that could have made you hard. So don't mislabel this season. Don't call it punishment when it's preparation. Don't call it failure when it's formation. Don't call it loss when it's actually God clearing space for what's next. One day you'll look back and realize this was the season that strengthened you enough to carry the blessing without losing yourself. And when that moment comes, you'll understand that nothing you went through was meant to harm you. It was meant to prepare you. There are seasons when it feels like heaven has gone quiet, like you're praying, but the words are just falling back on you, unanswered and unexplained. You've asked, you've waited, you've tried to listen, and still it feels like nothing is happening. And in those moments, it's easy to assume that God has stopped speaking. But silence does not mean absence, and quiet does not mean inactivity. God speaks in more ways than we expect, and often in seasons when we're listening only for one kind of sound. We sometimes think God's voice will always be loud, unmistakable, and immediate. We expect clarity to come wrapped in certainty, direction to arrive without doubt. But many times God speaks through restraint. He speaks through pauses. He speaks through the slow unfolding of events that don't make sense yet. And when life feels silent, it's often because God is working beneath the surface, not because He stepped away. You've been looking for an answer, but God has been building alignment. You've been waiting for instructions, but God has been shifting your heart. You've been asking for clarity, but God has been strengthening trust. And those things take time. They take quiet. They take stillness, because some lessons can't be taught in noise. There's a difference between God not speaking and God not speaking the way you expected. Sometimes He answers prayers by changing your desires. Sometimes He responds by removing distractions so you can hear Him more clearly later. Sometimes He closes doors without explanation, because if He explained everything now, you'd lean on the explanation instead of leaning on Him. Think about how many times you've asked God to fix something quickly, but He chose to walk you through it slowly. That wasn't cruelty, that was care, because quick fixes don't always heal deeply. God is more interested in your wholeness than your convenience. So He speaks through process, through patterns, through repetition, through nudges that only make sense once you obey them. There are things happening right now that you can't see yet. Conversations are taking place that don't include your name, but they include your future. Doors are being closed that you thought you needed, but they were never meant to hold what God has for you. Paths are being rerouted, timelines adjusted, people repositioned. And while it feels like nothing is happening, God is doing what He does best, working behind the scenes. You've been measuring God's nearness by how loud His response feels, but His presence is not dependent on volume. He's just as present in the whisper as He is in the shout. He's just as active in the waiting as He is in the breakthrough. And sometimes the silence is an invitation to slow down long enough to recognize the ways He's already been speaking. Look at your life. Look at what didn't fall apart when it could have. Look at what didn't destroy you when it should have. Look at the strength you didn't know you had. The wisdom you didn't ask for but somehow gained. That wasn't accidental. That was God communicating through preservation, through protection, through provision you didn't even notice at first. God has been speaking through peace that didn't make sense, through discomfort that wouldn't go away, through a restlessness that kept nudging you forward. He's been speaking through closed doors that saved you from unnecessary pain, through delays that kept you from rushing into something premature. He's been speaking through the very frustration you've been trying to escape, using it to push you toward growth. And here's the part we don't always like to hear. Sometimes God stays quiet because he already told us what to do, and now he's waiting on us to trust him enough to do it. Sometimes the silence isn't confusion, it's confirmation. Sometimes it's God saying, you know the next step. You're just afraid to take it. And instead of repeating himself, he gives us space to grow into obedience. You're not being ignored, you're being developed. God is training your spiritual hearing so you don't depend on constant reassurance. He's teaching you how to recognize his presence even when your circumstances don't change right away. He's inviting you into a deeper relationship, one that isn't built on constant signs, but on consistent trust. And when the silence finally breaks, when clarity comes and the pieces start to connect, you'll realize that God was speaking all along. You'll see how every pause had purpose, how every delay carried direction, how every quiet moment strengthened your faith in ways noise never could. So don't rush the silence. Don't panic in the quiet. Don't assume God has left just because he hasn't answered the way you hoped. He's closer than you think, working more intentionally than you realize, and speaking in ways that will make sense right on time. Because even when life feels silent, God is still speaking. There comes a moment when God doesn't ask us to have everything figured out. He asks us to let go of what's been gripping us too tightly. And for many of you, this is that moment. Not because you haven't tried hard enough, not because you don't care, but because fear has quietly taken the lead. It didn't announce itself. It didn't show up loudly. It slipped in disguised as responsibility, as wisdom, as being realistic. And before you realized it, fear started, aching decisions faith was supposed to make. You've been carrying the weight of what if for a long time. What if it doesn't work out? What if I fail again? What if I trust God and I'm disappointed? And that fear has been exhausting you. It's made you cautious when God was calling you to be courageous. It's made you delay when God was asking you to move. It's made you overthink things that used to come naturally. And God, in his kindness, is calling you back to trust. Not because fear makes you weak, but because trust is how you stay free. Trust doesn't mean pretending you're not afraid. It means choosing God even when you are. It means saying, I don't know how this will turn out, but I know who I'm walking with. And that kind of trust doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from remembering God's track record. It comes from recalling the moments he carried you through things you never thought you'd survive. It comes from realizing that if he brought you this far, he didn't do it just to leave you halfway. Fear wants control. It wants guarantees. It wants timelines, confirmations, and backup plans. But faith asks for surrender. It asks you to loosen your grip and let God lead, even when the path feels unfamiliar. And that's uncomfortable, especially if you've learned to rely on yourself, especially if you've been the strong one for so long. But self-reliance has limits, and God is inviting you into something deeper, dependence on him. Some of you stopped trusting. Not because God failed you, but because life hurt you. You trusted once and it didn't end the way you hoped. You prayed and the answer came wrapped in disappointment. So you told yourself you were being wise by guarding your heart, but what you were really doing was building walls around your faith. And God isn't angry about that. He understands, but he's gently asking you to take those walls down brick by brick and trust him again. This is not about reckless faith. It's about renewed faith. Faith that says, I don't need to know every step, I just need to know the next one. Faith that doesn't demand certainty before obedience. Faith that moves forward even when confidence feels shaky. Because trust is not the absence of doubt, it's the decision to obey in spite of it. God knows exactly where fear has been whispering lies to you. He knows where you've been holding back, where you've been playing it safe, where you've been settling because risk felt too expensive. And he's saying, you can trust me here, not everywhere all at once, just here, just now, just with this next step. That's how trust grows, one act of obedience at a time. Letting go of fear doesn't mean the feeling disappears overnight. It means fear no longer gets the final say. It means you stop consulting halting anxiety before making decisions. It means you stop shrinking yourself to avoid disappointment. It means you stop asking what's the worst that could happen and start asking what if God shows up? Because he does. He always has. Even in ways you didn't recognize at first. Even in moments you thought were setbacks. God has been faithful in your past, and that faithfulness didn't expire because you're in a new season. The same God who sustained you before is sustaining you now. The same God who guided you then is guiding you still.